It was a beautiful weekend. I hope you had a chance to get outside, to play, to exercise. And here's my question for you. When you came in, did you check yourself or family members for ticks? Welcome. I'm glad you're a part of the full story on WSHU and online at WSHU.org. I'm Ron Ropiak. Our show today is about ticks and Lyme disease and something many of us worry about or are currently dealing with. Now, I remember back in the early 80s when reports of Lyme first started making their way through the newsrooms around here. Many reporters simply didn't know what to make of it. It's different nowadays, and we all need to have the right information. And I've got to be honest with you, reading through all of this, we need more than one show. So maybe we could just say this is part A of what we're going to talk about today, and we'll do a part B sometime in the future. Now, we have a number of guests for you, and we'd like to include your comments and your questions in our program. The best way to reach us is by email. We're at tfs@wshu.org. Or you can drop us a note on Facebook. We're at Full Story WSHU. Just drop the. That's how you find us on Facebook, Full Story WSHU. Two guests for our first segment. Scott Campbell is chief of the Arthropod-borne Disease Lab at the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. And Dr. James Tomarken is Commissioner of Health for the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Dr. Campbell, Dr. Tomarken, thanks for your time today.
Sure. Thank you.
Dr. Tomarken, I'd like to begin with you, please. As Alice was told, begin at the beginning. What's a tick? Dr. Tomarken, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing with you. I'll tell you what, we're going to call you right back. We're going to get a better line. So, Dr. Campbell, maybe I could give that same question to you. Dr. Campbell, what is a tick?
Sure. A tick is an arthropod, which just means it has jointed legs, very similar to ticks. Mosquitoes, mites are all in the same group, and so they have 8 legs, and then they feed on blood, and that's where the trouble begins when they feed on humans, and they have bacteria in them or something else that cause human disease and transfer it while feeding for a blood meal.
So, Dr. Campbell, since it's an arthropod, my apologies for the mispronunciation, have they been around forever?
They've been around a long time, and really hard to tell when they began, but they have been around a long time. They've been part of the ecosystems and feeding on blood for quite some time.
Dr. Tomarken, thanks for rejoining us. We're glad we have you now on a good line. Where do the ticks live? And once they're there in this area, where do they end up going to that they get to us?
Well, there's a chain of events that causes ticks to be prevalent in certain areas. The main thing to remember is that they do not fly, but they are in the low brush, and they jump onto your clothing or your legs when you walk into and come in contact with this brush. And so they're in the environment because of being carried by mice and deer. But the main thing for individuals is making sure that they don't expose themselves when they're outside in certain environments and cleaning up their home environment so that they're not conducive to either the tick itself or to the animals that carry it, like mice and deer.
When you say clean up your environment, what do you mean?
Well, we don't want to have wood piles where mice hide and live and thrive. We don't want to have a lot of brush that the homeowners come in contact with. So we want yards to be well manicured. There are certain plants that could be helpful to be planted to keep the deer away. There are fences that are potentially available to keep deer out or reduce their numbers. So there's several ways that people can make their environment less receptive to not only the ticks, but those that carry the ticks.
Dr. Campbell, are there more ticks around nowadays, and are all ticks bad?
So all ticks feed on blood. So I guess it depends. It's just a parasitic relationship. We don't benefit from being fed upon by ticks. And the tick populations fluctuate from location to location. And as Dr. Tomarken said, a lot has to do with the hosts and the environment that they're in. The more places they have to hide and the more blood meals they can take from hosts, if they're plentiful, you're going to have more ticks.
Can I ask you a question? We were discussing this show beforehand, and we know that ticks go on dogs and cats, right?
Yes.
Do the dogs and cats get Lyme disease or something similar to that?
Dogs especially, they're susceptible. They have a vaccine that's available that your dogs can get. Cats are a little more resilient, but and also these ticks can be brought into the houses or your apartments from the pets that you own. So you need to do tick checks not only on yourself, but also do tick checks on your pets.
Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you right now, and we're going to have other guests on after this, so we'll expand on this. What should you do if you find a tick on your body or on your pet's body?
So the best way to remove a tick is using a fine tipped pair of forceps or tweezers. Just grasp it as close to the skin as possible and pull straight up. Don't twist it, don't squeeze it. Just pick it off with a pair of tweezers straight up and place it in either rubbing alcohol or tape it to a card. You can put it in hand sanitizer to kill it and then label it. And that's a record of when you were bitten and where it was. And then you can use that if you need to seek medical attention in the future.
Dr. I would add that
yes,
that you don't want to drown it with oil or squash it, because you don't want the tick to push inside the skin the pathogen that it carries. So you want to pull it out and not damage the tick as much as possible.
Dr. Tomarken, are the tests accurate? Are they 100% accurate?
Oh, there's very little in medicine that's 100% accurate. So I would say no. Most testing in medicine is done in conjunction with signs and symptoms that the patient presents with. So you'll often hear the term is compatible with. So if you have symptoms that are compatible with tick disease and you have a positive test, that's a very strong indication. And that's why we just don't do massive testing of people who have no symptoms. So, no, they're not 100%.
Dr. Campbell, let's say the test comes back and it's positive. What do you do?
Actually, Dr. Tomarken probably would be. He's a physician. I'm a medical entomologist. So why don't we ask Dr. Tomarken the best thing to.
Sure. I mean, I think if the clinician feels that the test is reliable and that the symptoms are compatible, then you would treat that patient with the appropriate medication for the disease. But it also depends on whether or not you have a test result that indicates an acute infection, like you had it within the last few days or weeks, or you had it in the past. And you don't generally treat diseases that you've had in the past to which you've developed antibodies. So it depends on the time sequence as well.
So you mean if I was infected, let's say last year, and then I'm discovering now that I have Lyme disease, your treatment would be different for me a year later?
Well, the question is, do you have an acute case of Lyme disease? Do you have symptoms, or are you just checking to see if you ever had something like Lyme disease? So if somebody said, gee, I would like to know, I have no symptoms now, I would like to know if I ever had Lyme disease, and they do the test and it says, yes, at some point in the past you had Lyme disease, you most likely would not need treatment. If, on the other hand, you had new symptoms, because you can get recurrence, and the test was positive, and it would be a different test that says, oh, this indicates an acute infection, then you should be receiving treatment.
Dr. Campbell, is the problem getting worse around here nowadays?
I wouldn't say it's getting worse. I think people are actually more aware. There may be more reporting of certain circumstances, but I mean, we are starting to move into where there are more animals. So, we're expanding our population. The animals are expanding populations, which drive more tick populations. So, we're contacting these populations more just by the way, we're expanding our population as well.
Finally, Dr. Tomarken, I'm almost out of time. If someone feels that they or a family member has been infected, what should they do?
Should always seek their consultation with their healthcare provider. If at any time they're concerned that they may have been exposed to a tick or a tick-borne disease, they should always consult their healthcare provider.
I only have 30 seconds left. Why is it that I read that so many people seem to ignore the symptoms and they don't go for testing?
Well, the symptoms are very similar amongst not only tick-borne disease, but generally viral illnesses. It's very nonspecific symptoms of fatigue, malaise, low-grade fever, and a lot of people would think, I just had a small case of a virus, and it'll go away in a few days, and I'll be fine. Because the symptoms are not very dramatic usually, unless you get a rash or something very pronounced. So it's very common that people would brush it off, so to speak, as a mild illness that they'll recover from without treatment.
Dr. James Tomarken is Commissioner of Health for the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Dr. Scott Campbell is Chief of the Arthropod-borne Disease Lab at the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. They're going to be with us for just a few more minutes, and when we come back from the break, we're going to have 3 more guests joining the conversation. It's The Full Story on WSHU. A short break. We'll be right back. It's The Full Story on WSHU. I just want to take just a moment to tell you about tomorrow's program. And it's about the state of our roads and the transportation system, specifically in Connecticut. As you probably know, Governor Lamont has been pushing for tolls from the day he took office. Now, there are those who are saying that the toll proposal is dead. The governor, I think, takes issue with that. But if the tolls don't go up, what is going to be plan B? There has to be a plan B, right? No one puts all their eggs in one basket. What would you do? If the tolls don't go up, the money has to come from somewhere, and the roads and the rails and the buses and the bridges have to be fixed and improved. What's your plan? Send us your thoughts at tfs@wshu.org. We're continuing our program about ticks and Lyme disease, and we have a number of fantastic guests for you today. Scott Campbell is still with us, Chief of the Arthropod-borne Disease Lab at the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Dr. James Tomarken, Commissioner of Health for the Suffolk County Department of Health Services. Also now, Bridget Fleming is with us. She's a Suffolk County legislator from Sag Harbor and a member of the Environment, Planning, and Agriculture Committee. Global Lyme Alliance's Director of Education and Outreach, Sara Tyghter, is sitting across from me, and Chris Fuentes, who is with Ranger Ready. Hi, Chris. Hi, Sara. How are you?
Hi there.
Hi.
Bridget, thanks for being with us. Bridget isn't with us right now. She's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. Sara, tell us about Global Lyme Alliance.
Global Lyme Alliance is a nonprofit based here in Stamford, Connecticut. Our focus is on our mission is on research. So our funds raised goes towards funding research grants for mainly diagnostics and treatments for patients. We are also focused on prevention and education.
Do people understand the extent of the problem for ticks and Lyme disease in our region, our listening area, specifically Connecticut and Long Island and parts of New York State?
I don't think people are fully aware of the risks of Lyme disease. I think most people take ticks for granted, and there's a lot of misconceptions around treating Lyme disease. So, one of the main areas that we are really trying to focus on is raising the awareness around ticks, tick bites, and tick prevention.
Chris, thanks for being with us. You're with Ranger Ready. You work with the Global Lyme Alliance, and also, just so we could say it at the beginning, you have developed a repellent, right, to try and stop the ticks.
Well, as we realized that so many people were being bitten so often, and we were trying to understand why. And what we realized is people need to start taking personal protective measures. It's very similar to wearing a condom or wearing a seatbelt or being mindful of other things that are going to impact your lifestyle. And ticks, unfortunately, are something we have to be aware of. And I developed a Ranger-ready repellents with my partner because we saw so many people around us being bitten by ticks. I raised my family in Fairfield County, and every single person in my family and all my friends around me got Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases. And I realized when I ended up in the hospital it was partly because I didn't wear repellent. So that's why we developed a repellent that people would wear as opposed to not wear and wanted to wear. That was our idea.
So your family members got Lyme disease. What was that like?
It was a long string because it was 20 years of various people getting Lyme disease in our family. And I got Lyme disease. I ended up in the hospital, and I was very similar to most cases, which it was misdiagnosed. I had a wonderful summer playing golf and cycling, and then I ended up in the hospital with a pretty big a swollen knee. And my bullseye went from my knee to my groin, and they had thought it was
I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop you there because a bullseye is one of the symptoms.
Bullseye is one of the symptoms. Most people get a classic bullseye. It's probably about the size of a lemon, and it swells up pretty quickly. I was one that had one almost a foot and a half long. And what happens is only 50% of the people actually see a bullseye. So most people, about half, don't actually see a bullseye. And I ended up in the hospital, and I was misdiagnosed as having MRSA, which is a flesh-eating disease, and completely was ready to go into surgery. And finally, an infectious disease doctor came in after 2 days and realized it was Lyme disease. And he said, no, you can have dinner. You're not going to get your leg cut open. You get to go have some antibiotics. And I literally healed with very heavy doses of antibiotics in about 3 weeks.
How long did you have to be on antibiotics for?
It ended up being about 6 months. If you really want to take out if you've had acute Lyme disease and it's developed to the point where it's about to take you over or you're that sick, it does take a longer course. And many people have to go back for treatment for Lyme disease. About 1 in 5 have long-term disability from Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases.
I want to get into some final comments from Dr. Tomarken and Dr. Campbell because I know they have to leave. Dr. Tomarken, I just wanted to ask you about ticks and climate change. Are you concerned nowadays that as the environment gets even warmer, that the problem will become worse?
I think it's a potential. I think we need to do more research, but any change in the environment that increases ticks is something we want to be aware of and do research on to see what we can do to reduce that risk. But I suspect that it has some influence. Maybe Dr. Campbell can elaborate on that.
Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, again, any changes in climate, whether it's tick-related or host-related, can alter the ecology of the disease and can either increase it or decrease it. It just depends on what part of the equation is affected.
I know you gentlemen have to get moving. I appreciate your time today and coming on the program. Dr. Campbell, Dr. Tomarken, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anytime you'd like to come back, just let us know. Sara, I have to ask you, if I'm listening to the program right now and I'm at home and I have a yard and I'm saying, I'm concerned about this, I'm worried about this, what should I do today to try and prevent tick infestation, to prevent my family from getting ill? What should I do?
There are a number of things that a person can do. One is keep your lawn short because ticks like long grass. And so if you kind of can remove some of their natural habitat, that would be helpful. Clear away brush, leaves, as was mentioned earlier, piles of wood. Those are all places where mice and small rodents like to hide, and they are primary carriers of ticks. So that's, I would say, keeping your perimeter clear. And then also you can do preventative measures like having your lawn sprayed as well to reduce your tick population.
Chris, you told me something during the break, which I think some people are going to be a little upset hearing. What are some of the things that people should do?
Well, I try not to upset people, but it does.
But
bearer of bad news.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've learned is that one of the main vectors for bringing ticks into your home and exposing your family is first your dog. And many people, we go out and do pop-up retail and talk to people all the time, and people come and say, I've had Lyme disease 3 times. And I say, well, do you have a dog? And they say, of course. And I say, do you let the dog sleep in the bedroom? And they say, well, absolutely. That's the reason.
Member of the family.
Member of the family. So I know it's hard to kick Fido out of the bed, but you got to push the dog out of the bedroom and be aware that, especially with young children, the dog goes on the couch and the kids hang out on the couch and they watch TV there or play video games, and they will end up getting Lyme disease if you let your dog go outside and be free and then go onto the couch. And then the other component is bird feeders. And people just don't realize.
Which I have to say, I had a number of bird feeders for a number of years.
I mean, I think you're not unusual. I think many of us have had bird feeders. And what you realize is that birds carry ticks, and they can migrate further distances. So they're bringing ticks that come from Canada and that come from the western part of the United States. Every year, about 5 billion birds will pass between Canada and the United States. And that migratory pattern is actually bringing the ticks. And global warming is allowing them to go further and over mountains that they hadn't gone before. And it's those tick-borne diseases like Powassan virus, which is deadly, where 1 in 5 are dead in 6 weeks, as opposed to 1 in 5 have long-term disability. So we're trying to help people understand that bringing rodents into your backyard, as Sara mentioned or the doctors mentioned, is really the primary piece, but then allowing them to come into your house is the second piece.
Bridget Fleming is joining us now. Bridget, as I mentioned before, is the Suffolk County Legislator from Sag Harbor and a member of the Environment, Planning, and Agriculture Committee. Bridget, how are you today?
I'm well, Ron. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for this important conversation.
It's our pleasure. What are your constituents telling you nowadays? How concerned are they when it comes to ticks and Lyme disease?
Well, as you can imagine, tick-borne illness has always been, or for a very long time, has been at the top of people's minds out here on the East End. I mean, you have to remember we've spent billions of dollars preserving open space, and the great outdoors is really the engine that drives our economy. People are here because of the natural environment, and we don't want people to be afraid of the natural environment. So there are ways to prevent these illnesses from impacting public health. But in answer to your question, people are concerned. As Chris Fuentes mentioned, many people out, especially in Suffolk County on the East End, have been impacted. It's sort of like the 6 degrees of separation. Very few people that I speak to are completely unfamiliar with tick-borne illness. Most people know someone or have themselves been impacted by these diseases. So our goals at this point have to be preventing the tick population from growing and protecting people from the adverse health effects. Because, as I said, we don't want people to be afraid to be outdoors, and there are ways of preventing the health impacts. So that's really where our focus has been in my office, and as you heard from Suffolk County health officials, really looking at how to manage the tick population and how to educate folks. I think you heard Dr. Campbell say that although the reports do show the presence of these pathogens in ticks trending upwards, and because, as your guests have mentioned, climate change and warming temperatures and wetter environments, we see more ticks. We have also at the same time been successful in increasing awareness in the population. There are some very basic things that you can do to prevent yourself and your family and your pets from getting sick, and so that's really where we need to focus, lowering the tick population and then educating folks on how not to be impacted by the health impacts.
Sara,
how not to get sick.
I'm sorry, Bridget. Sara, what should parents be doing? Because kids are still going to camp at this time of the year. They're out there playing in the yard. They're going to the beach. They're going camping. They're going for hikes. How can you ensure that your child is safe?
I think one of the main things parents can do is spray their children with a repellent, and that it should be used similar to sunscreen. I mean, we protect ourselves with sunscreen every day, and repellents should be used in that same way. Also, parents should be checking their children when they come in, and if possible, get them into the shower right away. If there's any ticks still crawling on them, to wash the ticks away.
And especially check the hair,
and
right?
Especially check the hair behind their ears, belly button, places where ticks like to crawl and hide.
Bridget, are you hearing from parents nowadays that they are more worried? Well, a parent is always worried, but I mean, are they even more worried during the summertime?
Sure, absolutely. And, we have a great program at Suffolk County where we're educating young people in schools and at summer camps. I just was at the South Fork History Museum this past weekend judging a poster contest where we have the educators going out into the public schools. There's a great program called Tick Wise. It's sponsored by the East End Mosquito and Tick Repellent Company, and they have an educator by the name of April Boitano who goes out to the schools and the camps and teaches the kids, and then the kids can educate the families and the parents. So there were some great posters filled with great information. I love what your guests are saying about how to prevent your children and yourselves from getting sick. I would say also it's really important, in addition to repellent, to dress properly. If you're out in the woods, your socks should be over your pants. Ticks climb, they don't fly, so you really want to make sure they're not getting onto your shoes and up into your pants. The waist of your pants, you should make sure your shirts are tucked in and your neck has something around it so that they can't get in there. But also you want to do the regular tick check as soon as you get back in the house and check your pets. Another great tip is that you can actually kill the ticks in the dryer. The one thing that ticks can't stand is desiccation, is being dried out. So if you put your clothes, just take the kids' clothes off and throw them right in the dryer as soon as you get in the house, 15 minutes on high, a tick can't survive that. So that's one of the best things to know. It's also one of the reasons why we're seeing the impacts of the changing climate allowing more ticks to be present in our environment, because we have more wet environment, because of higher sea level, groundwater is higher, and we've got more flooding. More areas that used to be dry are now swamp-like, and that's what the ticks love. So if you can dry them out, especially in the dryer, you're going to make sure that you're rid of them before they're able to latch on and get that blood meal and transfer the pathogens.
Let me read an email from Jen from New York. She writes, is the medical community going to start studying chronic Lyme? And if not, what should the many people with post-treatment Lyme syndrome do to get their lives back? So far, I've only been told by various doctors that it's just something you have to live with. Why is no other illness treated the same way? Sara?
So, chronic Lyme disease, it's somewhat controversial in terms of the understanding and the definition of the disease. There are physicians who treat patients who have long-term symptoms of Lyme disease after treatment. There is more research going into that area currently, and so I do think at some point down the road there will be better solutions for patients. But at this time, I think, depending on the severity of your symptoms and the symptoms that you are having, because no two persons have the same Lyme. So it's a complex disease to, one, diagnose and two, to treat. And so based on what your symptoms are and your condition, the doctor would treat, I would say, accordingly.
Chris, do you want to jump in on this?
Well, just adding in what Sara said, about 400,000 people a year will contract Lyme disease each year. And during the summer months, it can be as many as 10,000 people a week in the United States. And I think the community is growing so large that 1 in 5 people have long-term symptoms, and chronic Lyme, as Sara mentioned, is kind of hard to figure out. And it's a smaller group of people, but it's a growing group of people. And the question from your listeners is exactly right: is what are we going to do to address that? And I think the first step is to get the insurance companies and folks like that to recognize that Lyme disease is a chronic case of illness and has to be treated similar to other illnesses that we have in the United States. And I'm working with the state of Maine, and in the state of Maine, it's a retirement state. Lyme disease and vector-borne disease is equal to the 8 largest forms of cancer in an incident rate basis for retirees. So if you're over 55, your incidence rate is 200 persons per 100,000 of new cases of Lyme disease each year. That's about equal to the 8 largest forms of cancer among the same population. So there's large numbers and they're growing. And I think the answers are we have to stop it from both ends, which is to stop the occurrence of the disease from a prevention perspective, and then again treat those who are already being affected. We can't stop it all, but we can reduce it.
Chris Fuentes is with Ranger Ready, and they have their own company based right here in Fairfield County, and they also work with Global Lyme Alliance, and we have Global Lyme Alliance's Director of Education and Outreach, Sara Tyghter, with us, and Bridget Fleming is a Suffolk County legislator who has been with us before. She's from Sag Harbor and a member of the Environment, Planning, and Agriculture Committee. It's The Full Story on WSHU. If you have any questions or comments for our guests, please get them in now for the last segment of the program. Our email is tfs@wshu.org. One last break. We'll be right back. It's The Full Story on WSHU. If you'd like to comment on today's program, you could email us. We're at tfs@wshu.org. On Twitter, find us at Full Story WSHU. And remember, all our shows are available as podcasts. You can download The Full Story on Google Play or on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. We have you covered across the board. Bridget Fleming, Suffolk County Legislator, Global Lyme Alliance's Director of Education and Outreach, Sara Tyghter, and Chris Fuentes with Ranger Ready. They are with us until the end of the program. Chris, I have to ask you a question. Why is it that some people never seem to get infected? I know a landscaper, and he does all this work in his shorts and his T-shirt over the summer, and I see him go into these bushes, and I see tons of poison ivy in there. Nothing. And I say, aren't you worried about poison ivy? Aren't you worried about ticks? And he goes, Ron, it never has bothered me, and I've never gotten anything. Why is it that some people seem to be able to do this while the rest of us were worried about just going out in the yard and then check for ticks?
Well, it's a great question. As someone who gets bitten by ticks and mosquitoes a lot, I'm trying to find the answer to that question. So a lot of people ask me, tell me, they walk by and they say, I never get bitten. I don't need repellent. And there's a small group of people who actually don't get bitten. And we believe, we're not 100% sure, but blood type has a role to play in it. So I'm an A negative blood type, and people who have A blood type, A positive or negative, tend to get bitten more, but there's no science behind that. And then there's just some people who are just darn lucky. And we talk to hunters all the time, and they say, oh, yeah, I picked a tick off. I never really worry about it. I've been hunting for 25 years, and they've never been exposed and never had a tick bite. But then we meet, game wardens from Maine and the state of New York, and they go, we have Lyme disease everywhere, and we protect ourselves every day. So it's a little bit of roulette. It's a little bit of genetics. And then I think the myth that, the way we smell and the way we the oxygen we give off and the garlic we eat, I think that ticks aren't really, when they're looking for a blood meal, they don't ask you those questions. They just jump aboard.
Some people are just lucky. I look at poison ivy and I start scratching.
Exactly.
It's just one of those things. Sara, what about the kids? It seems, as we were talking during the break, kids are teaching the parents nowadays, aren't they?
They are. I mean, Global Lyme Alliance has developed curriculum that we push out into the schools. We also do education at summer camps, and we teach camp counselors about how to teach the kids how to check for ticks. And so we believe having kids as our frontline audience to really help them understand ticks, the risks for being bitten by a tick, and what they can do to prevent a tick bite and how to check. They will go home and educate their parents and families.
We are going to bring in another guest right now. Dr. Barbara Keber is with us. And just by coincidence, we had planned this show, and I opened up Newsday this morning, and I saw this great op-ed written by the doctor, along with another doctor, just on our particular topic. Doctor, thanks for spending time with us today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Your op-ed hit just at the right moment, and basically just tell us a little bit more about it, please.
Sure. So I think, what the last speaker was just talking about tick prevention and education about all of that is really great information. But I think one of the things that we want to think about, the tick-borne disease working group was created by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and it submitted its report last December, actually. So this is quite some time ago, and it really suggests that we really need a three-pronged approach it's very good about prevention and education and all of that, and that's the first prong of the approach. But there are two other prongs to the approach to really protecting our communities against these diseases, and there are more than just Lyme disease, as I'm sure you know. So for the other two prongs to this approach, there are two things. One is diagnosis, and it's pretty hard to make the diagnosis of these tick-borne diseases. The testing that we currently have available is it's really a 50-50 shot as to whether you get an accurate report from the blood test. It really so hinging your treatment on a blood test that's right half the time is kind of not really an acceptable way of dealing with this. And this is just for Lyme disease. And then there are other diseases, other tick-borne diseases, things like babesiosis or lichiosis. There's a whole list of about 13 tick-borne diseases. And, of course, here in Long Island, those are the three that are most predominant, as they are in New York State. Those are the three most predominant ones. But we don't really, again, have very good testing for any of these that are consistently accurate and then can really give us, a good method to follow up and make sure people have gotten the treatment and the treatment has worked. So, for instance, Lyme disease, it's very difficult with the blood test. It does not really tell you whether you have an active infection or an old infection. And so identifying, that distinction is really important, because if you have someone with an active infection, you treat them one way. If you have someone who had a past infection, they may not need treatment at all. It may just be, if they don't have ongoing symptoms, that may be it, but those antibodies stick around in the system, and that's what the blood test is measuring. So you wouldn't want to treat those people, but you would definitely want to treat someone with active infection, and the testing is really, much less accurate than we would really want it to be.
It needs to be brought up to stuff. I should mention, Dr. Keber, that you have your own family medicine practice in Glen Cove, I believe, right?
Correct.
And you're also the president of the New York State Academy of Family Physicians. And
I am. Yes, I was elected in June. And
congratulations.
So the Academy actually just passed some resolutions regarding this whole process. Resolutions, as we know it, with the Academy, are plans to advocate to the governmental systems. So in this instance, it would be the state Senate Legislature to try to work with us on improving the educational piece, and educational piece doesn't only include the people who are going to be affected by the tick bites, but also for physicians and other providers in the healthcare system to really know what symptoms to look for and really to know how to go about making the best of the testing that we do have, and so that's another big piece of it, but. The third priority is really, so again, along with diagnosis and treatment, the third thing really is environmental control measures, and that's really where we think that the governmental institutions can help us in working on things other than just, mulching your own lawn to provide a barrier to animals, et cetera. But there are other types of barriers that would prevent animals from coming into your, nowadays, the deer walk right up on your lawn, and so, if they're carrying ticks, you don't have to go out in the woods anymore to get bitten by a tick. You could walk out in your back patio and get bitten by a tick. So,
Doctor, I agree with that. Because of time, I just want to get a reaction to what you're saying from Bridget Fleming, who's the Suffolk County Legislature, who is with us. Bridget, your reaction, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Keber, I really appreciated your op-ed today. It's great that everyone is involved in bringing awareness to this issue. And yes, we do need to work across municipalities, and that is something that's happening now at the Suffolk County level. I sponsored legislation, first of all, that is bringing on a new staff member, an entomologist who's going to be devoted only to tick-borne illness at the Suffolk County Health Lab. But
That's
also
terrific.
the county executive's Suffolk Share program has now a public health partnership on tick-borne disease and on managing the tick population and preventing folks from getting sick. And that includes now Shelter Island and Southampton Town and 8 villages, Asharoka, Northport, Bellport, Oldfield, North Haven, East Hampton. And all these villages and towns are undertaking in a collaborative way various approaches to managing the tick population. So whether it's exclusion or culling of the hosts of the ticks, or the application of certain pesticide or repellents, or a combination, managing vegetation, as the doctor mentioned. These are all things that have to be done on a region-wide basis, because after all, we've got, this is all about vectors moving through the environment. And I wanted to just mention that the gentleman who said there was a landscaper, I think it was you, Ron, who said there's a landscaper friend who didn't get sick. I would be very worried to encourage any kind of complacency, because one thing that we are seeing is that the vectors themselves have an increasing incidence of infection. So Lyme ticks have more Lyme now than they did years ago, and even more than they did last year. So even folks who don't get sick, historically, are still running a risk when they don't take the kind of protective measures they should. But I appreciate the doctor's point that government has to take more aggressive measures, and I do believe we've got that happening. There's actually now Ed Moulton at the county executive's office, who is the director of shared services, is heading up this public health partnership that includes, for instance, shared purchasing of various repellents or pesticides, exchange of information on what works and what doesn't work in what locations. I mean, I was at Head of the Harbor not long ago, who is part of the partnership, and they have they're doing contraception on deer, which are vectors, as we all know, of tick-borne illness. So there's all kinds of things happening, but what's very important at this point is that we all coordinate, share information, share services, and move forward as a region-wide community in order to manage the tick population and to get the education out there so folks can prevent themselves, keep themselves from getting sick.
Bridget, I'm going to jump in quickly because I'm running out of time here, and I agree with you. I believe I also told that landscaper that I thought that he was crazy, but that's my opinion.
Exactly.
Sara Tyghter is still with us from the Global Lyme Alliance. Sara, what is the chance of us getting a vaccine sometime in the near future to help with this?
Well, there is currently a company that has a vaccine that they're working on. It's going into a phase 2 clinical trial starting in the fall, I believe. And so I would say the chances are that there will be a vaccine in the future, depending on the clinical studies that they're currently undergoing.
Chris, what are you hearing in terms of vaccination?
We're focused on prevention, so I let the medical side and those folks who are doing the work at the Global Lyme Alliance. It's a very broad world issue. It's all over the world, so we have scientists around the world. We have a global meeting once a year in October, and that meeting is getting bigger every year. So you can see, I think, the point that we're here talking about this and so many folks, and that there's newspaper articles this morning, it's causing that dialogue to happen, and we will have a vaccine and a solution as we move forward at some point.
Dr. Keber, I want to bring you in on the vaccination point, because what I took away from your op-ed piece, which I thought was so well written, and thank you for doing that, was that there needs to be the public-private partnership, and the government and private corporations, hospitals, researchers have got to get together and start coordinating, just like Bridget Fleming was saying, to do it on a government level.
Absolutely, and I think that's key. And I think that we can't dump it all on the government. I think there have to be partnerships with the private sector. And I believe that in terms of things like research on and now we are in, as Sara said, there is a phase 2 clinical trial on a Lyme vaccine. That's one thing, but there are 12 other diseases, and again, I think we need to be looking at appropriate treatments and preventive treatments like vaccines for some of these other things as well. And again, without the involvement of the CDC and the FDA and from a governmental side, but without the buy-in from the private sector with the pharmaceutical companies, this is not going to come to pass. So I think we have to kind of push on both sides of the aisle, really, to try to get this done and to try to really prevention is really the name of the game with pretty much any illness, especially a chronic one or something that can become chronic like Lyme. Some of the other tick-borne diseases, or also can be lethal. And so, as these, until we control the vectors and really, reduce the tick populations significantly, the idea of preventing with a vaccine for either Lyme or some of these other things are also, very key. And again, that's really where I see the public and private sector, really working together, to have research dollars from like the NIH, et cetera, be put, up for some of these projects, working in conjunction with the pharmaceutical entities.
Ron,
Dr. Keber, yes,
run out of time,
exactly. Bridget, I only have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to do a quick roundtable. So for you first, please.
I just wanted to quickly plug an important resource. Southampton Hospital, the Stony Brook University Southampton Hospital Tick Resource Center has a hotline. It's 631-726-TICK. And there's someone there who is a registered nurse who can answer any kind of question. So 631-726-TICK.
Thank you for that, Bridget. Chris, we have about a minute and a half left. Final comments from you, and then we'll get final comments from Sara.
I think everybody's talked about prevention, and I think prevention is personal protective measures. So wear repellents and learn about repellents and how to wear them properly, and learn the difference between DEET and picaridin, and learn how you should apply properly, and learn how to look after yourself and your children and your pets. And if you can go online at rangerready.com, you can learn about all the different things we're trying to teach folks, as well as have them wear repellents properly.
And again, you love your dogs. Everyone does, but be careful of them coming in. Check them for ticks. Absolutely. And also, once again, what you said about the bird feeders, it's so important, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Chris Fuentes with Ranger Ready. And finally, Sara Tyghter, who is Global Lyme Alliance's Director of Education and Outreach. Final thoughts, please, Sara?
So to learn more about tick prevention, and if you unfortunately get bitten by a tick and you need to learn how to remove a tick and what you should do after being bitten, visit betickaware.org.
Be tick aware, and once again, the phone number for the Suffolk, 631-72-TICK. Everyone has all these great emails and phone numbers. And Sara Tyghter is Global Lyme Alliance Director of Education and Outreach. Chris Fuentes with Ranger Ready. Dr. Barbara Keber practiced family medicine in Glen Cove and is president of the New York State Academy of Family Physicians. And Bridget Fleming is Suffolk County Legislature, a member of the Suffolk County Legislature from Sag Harbor, and a member of the Environment, Planning, and Agriculture Committee. Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank
Great
you.
discussion.
Not enough time. We need to do this again and fill in all the gaps that we didn't get to today. But thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sara. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for our show today. Julie Ferdino is our engineer. Carrie Frank is the digital editor. Our associate producers are Christian Carter, Sabrina Garone, Natalie Chafari, J.D. Allen is the producer, Ann Lopez is the senior producer, and Terry Sheridan is our news director. I'm Ron Ropiak. Thanks to you for being part of The Full Story.